What we have here, Eric, is the opportunity to dig some holes underneath this drip tape after we've injected the blue dye. And in our demonstration here, we have 3 rows, and we've irrigated 1 hour after the blue dye was injected in this row, 2 hours in the middle row, and 4 hours on the far row. And that gives us an opportunity to see where the blue dye went after those various irrigation events. In this configuration of the bed, we have a 28-inch wide bed, and we have a drip tape here that I consider to be a medium flow drip tape. But I know the drip tape is very important from one farm to the next in terms of how much water it's going to deliver. So what are we looking for in the important aspects of drip tape delivery?
Well, Bob, there are 2 attributes of a drip tape that are important. One is the emitter spacing, which is the distance between 2 consecutive emitters. Here we have a 12-inch emitter spacing drip tape. And the second attribute is the flow rate. Here we have a medium flow rate drip tape, which is 24 gallons per 100 foot, which means that after 1 hour, this bed has received 24 gallons, the second bed has received 48, and the third bed has received 96 gallons per 100 foot.
For every 100 feet, that's the amount that would be delivered. And of course, we're going to see what's happened with this particular tape after 1, 2, and 4 hours. And on an individual farm, if they're using different drip tapes, we may expect some different results. But let's take a look here on this first row. What happened after we irrigated only for 1 hour?
Well, after 1 hour, the dye is about 13 inches deep. And if you notice here, you have the separation between the plow zone and the deeper layer, and the end of the blue dye pattern is below that limit.
So in the case of the darker soil up at the top here within the plow layer, that is darker because it's got more organic matter, and when we've plowed and tilled the soil previously, we hold a little bit of that organic matter up here. And with higher organic matter, we would expect it to hold water a little bit better, but once it goes below that plow zone into the lighter colored soil, it's going to leach even that much faster, it would seem to me. So it's important that we know how deep this is going to go, and this gives us an opportunity to show a farmer what would be happening on their particular farm. I know one of the questions that the farmers asked early on when we first started doing this is, okay, so the blue dye is moving down 13 inches in this case. What does that mean in relation to the fertilizer that might be in the bed up here close to the drip tape?
Yeah, we've done several studies to see how representative the dye position is, and we found that where the dye is what the water is, and where the dye is what the fertilizer is. So by looking at where the dye is, we have a pretty good idea of where the water and the fertilizer are.
So the most soluble components of the fertilizer typically are nitrogen and potassium, and of course nitrogen is probably the most important element for us to be concerned about in the Suwannee Valley area. And so if there's soluble nitrogen in the bed and we move with water down to the plow layer, we could expect nitrogen, blue dye, water, all of that to be represented. And that's really important to make sure that it's not just blue dye, that it does actually fairly represent what the fertilizer would be as well. So that's very interesting. I also noticed that this is a relatively narrow blue dye pattern going down in the soil.
Yes, in this kind of sandy soils, the water moves vertically more than it does sideways.
Good. That's also important. One of those challenges certainly in these deep sands that we have here. Let's take a look and see what happened after we irrigated 2 hours. This is our middle row here, and after the blue dye was injected, we just continued to run it for an extra hour. So we have 2 hours following the blue dye, and we can see that it's continued to move it down even further. How far did this one go?
Well, this time, Bob, it moved 17 inches. So it's deeper than the one we just seen before.
So it's moved another 4 inches in this particular case, and it varies a little bit, but this is a pretty typical pattern that we've seen in all of our dye tests. And again, in this plow layer, you can see the mark between the darker soil up at the top and the whiter deep sands down below. And we've dug a lot of deep holes here on this farm, and we could dig down another 6 or 8 feet and find that same white sand all the way down. So unfortunately, one of the challenges for a lot of these soils is we just don't have anything that stops it or slows that movement. And so it's really important for us to keep it up in this top area as much as we can. And unfortunately, in this case, we probably would have made a mistake by moving it down a little further than we really wanted to move it.
That's true. Don't forget that the roots are going to be between here and that dark line. They're not going to go any deeper.
So if the roots are up in the shallow area and we've moved this fertilizer down as deep as we have here, will that fertilizer come back up?
It will not come back up. It will just keep going down and going down.
So with each subsequent irrigation, it's going to continue to move it down. So once we've moved it past that area, we've lost some of the fertilizer benefit that we would have put up here. Let's take a look at the 4-hour event. And here, Eric, we have the longest of the events in this particular area, and how far have we moved it down here?
It's moved even deeper. Now we're down to 25 inches.
And so 25 inches deep. It hasn't quite filled the entire width of this bed, which is also indicative of these soils. It's difficult to wet the entire bed, and we tend to move the water and the nutrients down deeper, and we can't hold it with the width of the bed. And that's certainly what we would be seeing here. The plants later on in the season, if the roots are down 12 inches deep, we have a little bit more of an ability to hold that water from going through. But in this case, we don't have a crop established on here yet. And it would show the challenge before that crop has an established root system in keeping the water and the nutrients up high in the bed. So Eric, over the past couple of years, I know we've dug a lot of holes on a number of farms. I think we probably have conducted about 20 of these demonstrations on a variety of farms throughout the area that are using plastic mulch and drip irrigation. And they've generally been very happy with what they see. It allows us an opportunity to work with them on their own farm and see what their irrigation practices do in relation to moving the blue dye down. And I know one of the farmers told me, well, the blue dye doesn't lie. And
that's true.
It's been very helpful to be able to actually see what has happened. I know you're continuing to do some research and fine-tuning the existing practices. What kinds of things are you working on now?
We're working on certain things, Bob. First, we do that on different farms, like you just said. Second, we try different drip tapes, some low flow, medium flow, high flow. We try different amount of time, ranging from 45 minutes to about 8 hours. And we also try to operate the system under different operating pressures so that we can mimic all the range of systems operation that we may face on different farms.
I know that we've dug a number of holes here, as I mentioned, 20 farms in the Suwannee Valley area, but you've also been working with county extension agents throughout the state, and so this is really a statewide program that would be available for farmers to take a look at and see. In terms of the kinds of things that we've learned and the kinds of refinements that the growers have been able to adopt on their own farms to help them improve their best management practices, I know there's a couple of key things that they can and have done on their farms as a result of seeing the blue dye test. What are some of the key things that you see being changed in the way that they implement their water and fertilizer program?
Definitely, there are two main points that we've learned and that the growers have learned with us. The first one is that when the plants are small, they don't need a lot of water. We don't need to irrigate for long periods of time. And the second thing we've learned is that it's better to split your irrigation. 2 hours, 2 hours in one shot is not as good as 1 hour twice a day. Also, if we were to irrigate 4 hours in one day, it's better to do 4 shots of 1 hour rather than 1 shot of 4 hours.
And it's not uncommon to have several irrigation events in the same day when the crop is up and near maturing, as a watermelon crop putting on fruit or whatever stage it might be. There's a lot of water that the crop would demand. The other thing that I've observed over a longer period of time as a result of these kinds of demonstrations, that farmers tend to put less of the fertilizer under the bed and depend more on fertigating or injecting fertilizer through the irrigation system. That's why we call it fertigation. And that has been a major change. And overall, that has reduced the amount of nitrogen that the farmer would need to apply because they're making more efficient use of it. They're not losing any at the beginning of the season. And of course, farmers are the best stewards of the land, and they don't want to apply any more water or fertilizer than absolutely necessary. And the cost of doing both of those now has really escalated in the last few years. So these kinds of projects have been really important in helping growers fine-tune and improve their water management systems here in the Suwannee Valley area, and I know in the rest of the state as well. And we really appreciate the research that you've done to be able to help us to take this kind of work out on the farms and demonstrate it and help the farmers in this area. So we want to thank you for your work.
Well, thank you very much. You're a good digger, Bob.